I was in Berlin for an art residency when my parents sold my studio to fund my brother's startup. When I returned, they said, "You can paint anywhere." I smiled. "What's funny?" They snapped. I said, "The studio you sold was actually—" They panicked. Before I tell you exactly how this massive betrayal unfolded and the satisfying way their entire world collapsed, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Grab a warm cup of coffee, sit down, and listen to me tell this whole story. The taxi ride from the airport was supposed to be the victory lap of my early 30s. I had just spent 90 days in Berlin, a city that breathes art, completing a residency that was supposed to put my name on the map. I was 31 years old, and for the first time my hands felt entirely my own. I wasn't just Samuel's weird younger brother anymore. I was Elijah, a working artist who had just finalized a series that a prestigious European gallery wanted to showcase. My fingers were permanently stained with charcoal and oil paint, and my mind was buzzing with the specific, brilliant light I knew would be waiting for me back in my third-floor loft. But as the yellow cab turned the corner onto my street, the triumphant feeling in my chest evaporated, replaced by a cold, suffocating dread. My brain simply refused to process the visual information hitting my eyes. The old factory block, my home, my sanctuary, was gone beneath a towering, ugly cage of iron scaffolding and thick, green safety netting. It looked like the building was being prepped for an execution. A massive, rusted dumpster squatted aggressively on the sidewalk right by the front entrance. It was overflowing with jagged pieces of drywall, splintered 2x4s, and tangled wires that looked like ripped-out veins. I shoved a $50 bill at the driver, not waiting for change, and practically fell out of the cab. My heavy duffel bag hit the concrete with a dull thud. I walked toward the entrance, my boots crunching over pulverized plaster and broken glass. The heavy oak front doors had been propped open with a paint bucket. Inside, the hallway had been skinned alive. The vintage brass mailboxes, the ones my grandpa used to polish every Sunday, were ripped out, leaving ugly, jagged holes in the plaster. The familiar smell of aged wood and turpentine was completely gone, replaced by the harsh, chemical stench of industrial dust and demolition. "Hey, you can't be in here without a hard hat, buddy." A guy wearing a neon safety vest and holding a digital tablet stepped out of what used to be the ground-floor bakery. He looked at me with the bored, unbothered authority of a man who was just doing his job. "I live here," I said, my voice sounding thin and hollow in the cavernous, ruined space. "I'm Elijah, Unit 3C. That's my studio." The man frowned, tapping the screen of his tablet. 3C? Yeah, no. Full interior renovation. The new owners closed last week. Your personal items were boxed up and hauled to a storage facility out by the interstate. Demolition crew started on the third floor yesterday. New owners. The words felt like broken glass in my throat. I didn't sell. He gave me a look of mild pity mixed with finality. "Look, man, I just run the site schedule. You need to call the management company." My hands were shaking violently as I pulled my phone out of my pocket. There was a text message sitting on my screen from my mother. It read, "Elijah, we know you are landing today. Don't dramatize this. We made a reasonable business decision. Samuel needed capital proof of assets for a closing round. You can paint anywhere." I hit the call button. She answered on the very first ring, her voice smooth and entirely devoid of guilt. "Elijah," she said, sounding like she was greeting a mildly annoying coworker. "You're back. Did you sell my studio?" I demanded, the anger finally breaking through the shock. A heavy, irritated sigh echoed through the receiver. "It was an investment, Elijah. For the family. For your brother. It's my home," I yelled, not caring that the construction worker was staring at me. "It's Grandpa's space." "It is a room," she corrected, her tone dropping into that familiar, condescending register she always used to make me feel small. "And you don't even use it efficiently. Samuel is building something scalable. Investors don't wait for feelings. You will be fine. You always are." to understand how my mother could casually sell the roof over my head to fund a tech startup. You have to understand the deeply toxic hierarchy of our family. In the grand play of my parents' lives, Samuel was the leading man, and I was just the stagehand sweeping up the mess. Samuel is exactly 2 years older than me, but he might as well have been born a prince. From the moment he could string a sentence together, he was groomed for absolute greatness. He possessed a kind of loud, charismatic arrogance that my parents mistook for visionary leadership. When it came to Samuel, no expense was ever spared. His massive college fund was fully stocked before he even hit middle school. While I spent my teenage summers sweating over a deep fryer at a local diner just to afford basic art supplies and community college credits, Samuel was sent to elite summer leadership camps in Switzerland. When Samuel graduated, my parents didn't just throw a party. They threw a networking gala. They co-signed the lease on a brand new Porsche 911 for him as a graduation gift, claiming he needed to project an image of success to attract venture capitalists. Meanwhile, my own achievements were met with polite, patronizing nods. When I won a prestigious regional art grant that came with a modest stipend, my dad looked at the award letter, patted me on the shoulder and said, "That's a nice little hobby, Elijah, but you need to think about a real salary eventually. How are you going to pay a mortgage with paint?" Everything in our household revolved around Samuel's endless, draining potential. He was always launching an app, pitching a platform, or talking about his next big promotion to CEO of his own life. My parents funded his sleek, glass-walled apartment downtown. They paid for his expensive tailored suits. They bought into the illusion that he was a genius, even though every single business venture he touched eventually bled money. I survived by making myself small. I was the quiet, talented but unstable younger brother. My art exhibitions brought in decent money, enough to live independently and comfortably, but my success was always treated by my family as a temporary, slightly embarrassing phase. I never asked them for a dime. I earned my keep, paid my taxes, and minded my own business. I mistakenly believed that if I just proved I didn't need their help, they would eventually respect my boundaries. But I didn't realize that in their eyes, I wasn't an independent adult. I was an untapped resource. Samuel's current startup was a disaster hiding behind a sleek logo. He was burning through cash at an alarming rate, throwing lavish parties for investors while failing to deliver a working product. But my parents were so deeply invested in the narrative of his success that they couldn't see the giant financial sinkhole he had created. I remember sitting at the dinner table last Thanksgiving. Samuel was swirling a glass of expensive bourbon, complaining loudly about the salary demands of his lead developers. My dad was nodding sympathetically, pulling out his checkbook to cover Samuel's rent for the month. I sat at the end of the table, entirely invisible. "You'll get there, Sammy," my mom had cooed, placing a manicured hand over his. "You just need a little more runway. We'll make sure you get it." I didn't know it then, but she was looking right at me when she said it. They never saw me as a son. They saw me as a backup generator. And when Samuel's house of cards started to collapse, they looked around for something valuable to sell to keep his ego inflated. Unfortunately for me, my name was attached to the only appreciating asset left in the family. The studio they sold wasn't just a piece of prime real estate to me. It was the very foundation of my identity. It belonged to my grandpa before it belonged to me, and he was the only person in my entire bloodline who ever looked at me and saw someone worth raising. My grandpa was a commercial painter by trade, a man with thick, calloused hands and a quiet demeanor. But on the weekends, he would lock himself in that third-floor loft and paint massive, breathtaking oil landscapes that he absolutely refused to sell to anyone. When my grandmother passed away when I was 10, my parents became a pair of busy corporate silhouettes. They were always traveling for conferences, always schmoozing clients, always hyper-focused on Samuel's prestigious prep school athletic schedule. So Grandpa quietly stepped in. He started taking me to the loft after school. Back then, the neighborhood was gritty. It smelled like rust, wet concrete, and exhaust fumes from the nearby highway. Inside that loft, surrounded by the smell of turpentine and aged wood, he taught me everything that actually mattered. He taught me how to stretch a canvas over a wooden frame so tight that it would literally sing if you tapped it with your knuckle. He taught me how to mix colors until they looked like real blood and real sunlight. But most importantly, he taught me how to survive the chaotic, dismissive energy of my own family. Silence can be a weapon, Elijah, he used to tell me, sitting on his old, paint-splattered wooden stool while watching me sketch. People who are guilty or full of themselves hate silence. If you aim it right, silence makes them fill the empty air with their own mistakes. When Grandpa died, the funeral was packed with union workers, local artists, and people whose lives he had quietly touched. My parents stood in the front row, checking their expensive watches, clearly annoyed that the service was running long. Samuel spent half the time outside in the parking lot, taking business calls and leaning against his leased Porsche. I stood by the casket entirely alone, feeling like the world had just ended. Then came the reading of the will and the inheritance that changed everything. My parents were furious. Grandpa didn't leave the loft to his son. He left it directly to me. It was his final gift to the only grandson who actually understood its worth. At the time, my dad scoffed at the paperwork. "It's a liability," he had sneered. "A drafty old warehouse in a terrible part of town. You'll go bankrupt just trying to keep the heat on." But then the city changed. The gritty alleyways got fairy lights. The abandoned warehouses turned into upscale galleries, craft breweries, and luxury lofts. Gentrification hit the neighborhood like a tidal wave, and suddenly, the worthless liability my grandpa left me was sitting on a multi-million-dollar gold mine. Real estate developers started circling like vultures, slipping cash offers under my door. I threw every single offer in the trash. I didn't care about the money. I cared about the specific way the light hit the floorboards at exactly 3 p.m. I cared that it was the only place in the world where I felt completely safe. But my parents didn't see a sanctuary. They saw a giant, untapped college fund they could raid to save their golden child. Looking back, the signs of their betrayal were flashing in neon red letters. I was just too blind to see them because I still, against all logic, desperately wanted to believe they were my family. 2 weeks before I left for my residency in Berlin, I stopped by my parents' massive suburban house for a rare Sunday dinner. The atmosphere in the living room was incredibly tense, thick enough to cut with a knife. Samuel was pacing back and forth across the expensive rug, aggressively chewing on his thumbnail, his phone glued to his ear. My dad was sitting in his leather armchair, rubbing his temples, looking older and more haggard than I had ever seen him. "The burn rate is too high," I heard Samuel hiss into the phone, his voice laced with pure panic. "I don't care what the projections say, David. We need liquidity by the end of the quarter or we default on the bridge loan." He hung up and glared at my dad. "I need a massive infusion, Dad. The Series B funding completely fell through. If I don't show the remaining investors that I have solid collateral backing the company, they are pulling out. All of them. I'll lose everything." My dad sighed heavily, a sound of total defeat. "We're tapped out, Samuel. The second mortgage on this house is maxed. We've liquidated our stock options. We've given you everything we have." I walked into the room holding a bottle of wine, and the conversation instantly died. They both snapped their heads toward me, looking like a pair of thieves who had just been caught cracking a safe. "Hey," I said slowly, sensing the heavy hostility. "Everything okay?" Samuel forced a fake, incredibly tight smile. "Everything is fine, Elijah. Just high-level corporate structuring. You wouldn't really get it. How are the little paintings coming along?" I ignored the condescending jab. I was used to it. "I leave for Berlin in 2 weeks. I just came to drop off a spare key to the studio, just in case there's a water leak or an emergency while I'm gone." I tossed the heavy brass key onto the glass coffee table. I didn't notice the way my dad's eyes immediately locked onto it, or the sudden, predatory glance he exchanged with Samuel. It was a look of pure, desperate calculation. "A spare key," my dad repeated slowly, his tone shifting. "Right? That's a good idea, son. We'll keep a very close eye on the place. Have a good trip." That was the exact moment. That was the moment I handed them the loaded weapon they used to slaughter my life. They didn't see a son asking for a simple favor. They saw an opportunity. While I was in Europe, completely unreachable and immersed in my art, they went to work. They took that key they brought in the developers, and they started negotiating the sale of my entire existence. They evaluated my life, put a price tag on my memories, and decided my brother's failing ego was worth significantly more than my home. The first few days after returning from Berlin to find my studio destroyed, I was living in a cheap, depressing motel off the interstate. I was sleeping on a lumpy mattress, staring at a water-stained ceiling, trying to figure out how to even begin fighting back. I felt completely isolated. My phone was dead silent. Nobody from my immediate family reached out to check on me, except for Aunt Clara. Aunt Clara is my mom's younger sister. She has always played the role of the sweet, understanding peacemaker in the family. She showed up at my motel room on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, carrying a plastic Tupperware container of homemade chicken soup and wearing a look of deep, practiced pity. "Oh, Elijah," she sighed, pulling me into a hug that felt more restrictive than comforting, her heavy perfume masking the smell of the damp motel room. "I am so incredibly sorry about all this mess. Your mother is just so stressed. You know how she gets when Samuel is under pressure from his investors." I sat on the edge of the cheap bed, staring blankly at the wall. "She sold my house, Clara. She sold Grandpa's studio to a developer. You don't get to blame that on a little bit of stress." Clara sat in the only chair in the room, smoothing her expensive skirt. "I know it hurts, honey. I really do. But you have to try and look at the big picture here. Samuel's company employs people. He has massive, real-world responsibilities. You're single, you're an artist, you don't have a family to support yet. You can bounce back from this. Sometimes, being part of a family means making difficult sacrifices for the greater good. Don't let this tear everyone apart. Have you thought about just letting it go?" I was actually listening to her. A small, pathetic, deeply ingrained part of me still wanted a mother figure to tell me everything was going to be okay, to stroke my hair and say it was just a bad dream. But then, Clara's phone buzzed loudly on the nightstand right next to my hand. The screen lit up brightly. I didn't mean to snoop, but the text message notification was right there in bold, black letters. It was from my mom. "Is he calming down? Did you convince him not to call a lawyer? We need him compliant and quiet until the final escrow clears next week. Don't let him leave that room." My blood turned into ice water. I stared at the bright screen, reading the words over and over again until they burned themselves into my retinas. She wasn't here to comfort me. She wasn't here because she cared. She was a spy. She was a handler sent here to manage me, to make sure the dumb, emotional artist didn't throw a legal wrench into their multi-million-dollar transaction. The soup, the hug, the soft words, it was all a calculated manipulation. I looked up at Clara. She was still smiling that sickly sweet, patronizing smile, completely oblivious to the fact that I had just seen her true face. I stood up, picked up the container of soup, and shoved it back into her hands. "Get out," I said quietly. Her smile immediately faltered, replaced by confusion. "Elijah, what's wrong? I'm just trying to help you through this." "Get out," I repeated, my voice dropping an octave, carrying a dangerous, hard edge I didn't know I possessed. "And tell my mother that I am not compliant. Tell her the sacrifice is over." I physically backed her out the door and slammed it shut, locking the deadbolt. I stood in the quiet room, my chest heaving, the betrayal tasting like copper in my mouth. I realized right then that I didn't have a family. I was entirely alone in enemy territory. And if I was alone, I had absolutely no reason to hold back anymore. I picked up my phone and began searching for the most ruthless litigator in the city. I found Maya through an old friend who used to run an independent art gallery downtown. Maya wasn't your standard, friendly neighborhood real estate attorney. She was a high-stakes, ruthless litigator who specialized in brutal, scorched-earth divorce settlements and hostile corporate takeovers. She was famous in legal circles for destroying powerful men in court without ever raising her voice. When I walked into her downtown office, a sleek, intimidating space overlooking the city skyline, she didn't offer me coffee, and she certainly didn't offer me fake sympathy. She just pointed a manicured finger toward the heavy leather chair across from her massive glass desk. "Tell me the facts. Leave the emotions and the family drama in the waiting room," she said, pulling a yellow legal pad toward her and uncapping an expensive pen. I sat down, took a deep breath, and laid out everything in chronological order. I told her about the residency in Berlin, the sudden appearance of the scaffolding, the missing belongings, the phone call with my mother, and the text message on Clara's phone. I handed over a thick manila folder containing the original deed my grandpa had given me, my property tax records, and every single document I could print out regarding the new developer's massive condo project. Maya flipped through the documents with sharp, precise, almost predatory movements. Her eyes darted across the pages, absorbing the dense legal jargon like a supercomputer processing code. For 10 agonizing minutes, the only sound in the room was the ticking of a heavy clock on the wall and the sharp rustle of paper. Finally, she stopped. She pressed her fingertips together, resting her chin on her hands, and looked directly at me. Her expression was completely unreadable, her dark eyes entirely devoid of emotion. "There is a massive, fundamental problem with the way this building was sold, Elijah," she said, her voice low and tight with suppressed energy. My stomach plummeted to the floor. What kind of problem? Did they find a loophole in the deed? Did my dad use his old power of attorney from when I was in college to sign it over? Maya shook her head slowly. "No, the problem isn't what they sold. The problem is what they thought they sold. Your parents made a catastrophic legal assumption, and the developer's high-priced legal team was too lazy and too rushed to do a proper, deep title search because they wanted to close the deal before the quarter ended." She spun a heavy, yellow document around and pushed it across the glass desk toward me. It was a copy of my grandpa's original trust agreement, a document I hadn't looked at in over a decade. "Elijah, did you ever actually sit down and read the exact, specific wording of your grandpa's will regarding the studio?" she asked, tapping the paper. I shook my head, feeling foolish. I was 20 years old. I was grieving. I just signed where the estate lawyer told me to sign. Maya tapped a specific, dense paragraph highlighted in faded yellow ink. "Your grandpa was a very smart, very paranoid man. He knew your family. He didn't just leave you a building. He executed a legally binding split ownership covenant. It's an incredibly rare legal structure in this state, but it is completely, undeniably bulletproof." I stared at the dense legal text, trying to make sense of the archaic wording. What does a split ownership covenant actually mean in plain English? Maya leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with a dangerous, thrilling kind of excitement. She looked like a predator that had just spotted an open wound. "It means that the ownership of the exterior shell of the building, the brick walls, the roof, the foundational structure, the common areas, is legally severed from the interior improvements and airspace rights of Unit 3C. She paused to let the weight of the words sink in. "Your parents managed to fraudulently claim ownership of the shell through a dummy corporation they set up, which they just sold to the developer for millions. But they do not own the interior of your studio. The airspace, the drywall, the floorboards, the right to occupy that exact three-dimensional space in the universe belongs exclusively to you, Elijah. They sold a hollow box, but they don't own the inside of the box. And legally, the developer cannot touch a single millimeter of your interior space without your express, written, notarized consent." The realization hit me like a physical blow to the chest. I owned the inside. My parents had sold a multimillion-dollar property to a massive real estate conglomerate, promising them a blank slate to build luxury condos, but the core of the project, the actual space they needed to build their penthouse, was entirely untouchable. "But wait," I said, my heart starting to race against my ribs. "If that's true, how did the sale even go through? A developer wouldn't spend $30 million buying a building if they knew they couldn't legally demolish the inside of the main unit." Maya pulled out a second, thicker folder from her briefcase. This one was filled with pristine copies of the closing documents she had subpoenaed from the city records that morning. "You're absolutely right. They wouldn't," she agreed smoothly. "Which means someone had to actively convince the developer that you had willingly surrendered your interior rights." She slid a single piece of paper out of the folder and placed it squarely in front of me. It was a transfer of rights and quitclaim agreement. At the very bottom of the page, written in stark black ink, was my signature. I stared at it. It looked incredibly similar to how I signed my paintings. The sweeping loops, the slight leftward slant, the heavy pressure on the E. It was a near-perfect forgery. But the date next to the notary stamp proved the lie. I had been 3,000 miles away in Germany, drinking coffee in Berlin, when this document was supposedly signed and notarized in a downtown office. "They forged my name," I whispered, feeling physically sick, my stomach churning. "My own parents forged my signature to steal my home." "Oh, Elijah, it gets so much worse than a simple forgery," Maya said, her voice dropping into a register of pure, clinical disgust. Maya placed another document right next to the forged signature. It was a formal letter, typed on what looked like official medical letterhead, though it lacked a specific psychiatric clinic's name. I began to read it, and as my eyes scanned the paragraphs, my vision blurred with a kind of absolute, white-hot rage I had never experienced before. The letter formally described me to the developers and the title company as an eccentric, highly unstable individual with a long, documented history of severe psychological distress and financial incompetence. It claimed, in cold, clinical language, that I was entirely incapable of managing my own assets. It stated that due to my erratic behavior, my family had been forced to step in as unofficial conservators to protect me from destroying my own life. Painted me as a massive liability. Painted me as a crazy, delusional artist who needed his mommy and daddy to make adult decisions for him so he wouldn't end up on the street. "They didn't just steal your property," Maya said quietly, watching my reaction carefully. "They assassinated your character to make the paperwork slide through the title company without raising any red flags. They created a fictional narrative where taking your home wasn't a crime. It was an act of mercy by a loving family." I clenched my jaw so hard I thought my teeth would crack under the pressure. The betrayal was so deep, so profoundly vicious, that it bypassed sadness entirely and hardened into a cold, diamond-sharp fury. They didn't just want the money to save Samuel's startup. They wanted to erase my autonomy. They wanted to reduce me to an incompetent, voiceless child so Samuel could play billionaire CEO. "What do we do?" I asked, looking up at Maya. My voice didn't shake. My hands were perfectly steady. The old, compliant, people-pleasing Elijah was dead, buried under the rubble of his own studio. Maya smiled. It was a terrifying, beautiful smile. "We go to war. I am filing an emergency injunction and a stop-work order with the Supreme Court in exactly 1 hour. We are charging your parents and the developer with felony forgery, criminal conversion of property, and massive civil damages. By tomorrow morning, that entire construction site will be frozen solid. It won't be a development project anymore. It will be a crime scene." The legal bomb Maya dropped the next morning sent shockwaves through the city. The court immediately granted the emergency stop-work order based on the evidence of forgery. Maya hired aggressive process servers to deliver the injunctions simultaneously. One directly to the construction site foreman, one to the developer's corporate headquarters, and one straight to my parents' front door. I was sitting in my depressing motel room, drinking terrible instant coffee, when the heavy, frantic pounding on the door started. I didn't even have to look through the peephole to know who had come hunting for me. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. My mother, my father, and Samuel were standing in the narrow, dingy hallway. They looked completely unhinged. Samuel's face was flushed dark red, his designer silk tie pulled loose, sweat beading on his forehead. My father looked pale, exhausted, and terrified. My mother, however, looked furiously indignant. She pushed past me into the room without an invitation, her heels clicking aggressively on the cheap linoleum. What the hell is wrong with you? She screamed, spinning around to face me, her eyes wide with rage. Are you completely out of your mind? Do you have any idea what you just did to this family? I secured my legal property, I said calmly, leaning casually against the doorframe, watching them unravel. Samuel stepped forward, jabbing a trembling finger toward my chest. You just froze a $30 million development project. You absolute idiot. My investors are panicking. The bridge loan keeping my company alive is tied directly to the successful transfer of that deed. If the developer pulls out because of this injunction, I am ruined. I lose the company. I lose the cars, the apartment, everything. That sounds like a terrible business strategy, Samuel, I replied, keeping my voice utterly deadpan. You really shouldn't build your runway with stolen materials. My dad stepped between us, holding his hands up like a desperate referee trying to stop a prize fight. Elijah, please, let's be rational about this. The injunction is just a massive misunderstanding. We did what we had to do to protect the family's assets. You were out of the country, the market was turning, and we had to move fast. We can compensate you. We'll buy you a better studio. Anywhere you want in the city. I looked at him, genuinely marveling at the depth of his delusion. You forged my signature, Dad. You attached a fake medical letter calling me mentally incompetent and unstable to steal my inheritance. My mother waved her hand dismissively, as if committing multiple felonies was just a minor social faux pas I was blowing out of proportion. Oh, stop being so dramatic, Elijah. It was boilerplate legal language to satisfy the insurance underwriters. Nobody actually thinks you're crazy. We just needed to bypass the red tape so Samuel could secure his future. You are being completely selfish and vindictive. Selfish? I repeated slowly, letting the word hang in the air. I looked at the three of them, the golden child, the enabler, and the architect of my misery. You broke into my life, threw my grandpa's legacy into a dumpster, forged my identity, and you're calling me selfish because I won't let you get away with it. Elijah, please, Samuel begged, his voice suddenly cracking. The arrogance evaporated, revealing the desperate, terrified coward underneath. Just call your lawyer. Tell her to lift the injunction. Tell them you authorized the sale. I will pay you back double whatever the studio is worth when my startup goes public. Just fix this. I looked Samuel dead in the eye. For the first time in my entire life, I saw him clearly. He wasn't a genius. He was a fraud. No, I said quietly. What do you mean, no? My mother hissed, stepping toward me. I mean, no. I am not lifting the injunction. I am not signing anything. The demolition stops today. And if any of you ever show up at my door again, I will call the police and have you arrested for trespassing. I stepped back and held the door wide open. Get out of my room. That night, after my family finally left, the adrenaline that had been keeping me upright completely wore off, leaving me feeling hollowed out, bruised, and utterly exhausted. Maya had texted me the address of the storage facility where the developers had carelessly dumped my belongings. I drove my beat-up car out to Route 9, a desolate, ugly stretch of highway lined with industrial parks and cheap motels. The storage facility was a massive, soulless labyrinth of corrugated metal doors and flickering, buzzing fluorescent lights. It looked like the kind of place where people hide divorce assets or dead relatives. The night clerk barely looked up from his phone as he checked my ID and handed over a magnetic keycard. Unit 418. Down the hall. Take a left, he mumbled. I walked down the long, freezing concrete corridor, the sound of my boots echoing loudly off the metal walls. When I finally found Unit 418, I swiped the card, slid the heavy padlock open, and rolled the metal door up. The smell hit me instantly. It was the smell of my entire life, packed into cheap cardboard boxes and wrapped in thin industrial plastic. The movers hadn't been careful. They had treated my life like garbage. Canvases that took me months to paint were stacked haphazardly against the wall, some of the delicate wooden frames visibly bent and splintered. Boxes of incredibly expensive oil paints and imported brushes were crushed under the weight of heavy, carelessly tossed furniture. It looked like the aftermath of a violent disaster. I stepped inside, carefully navigating the wreckage, my heart pounding in my throat. Deep in the back corner, wedged tightly between a stack of empty plastic crates and my old, stained mattress, I saw it. My grandpa's wooden stool. I pulled it out into the dim overhead light. The wood was deeply stained with decades of history. Cadmium red, cobalt blue, titanium white. I ran my hand slowly over the seat and felt the deep, familiar gouge near the edge. I had made that gouge when I was 12 years old, dropping a heavy metal palette knife while trying to aggressively mimic Grandpa's painting style. I had been terrified he would scream at me. Instead, he had laughed, rubbed some raw linseed oil into the scratch, and told me that every mark tells a story. Standing there in that cold, sterile storage unit, looking at the only piece of genuine love I had left in the world, the dam inside my chest finally broke open. I didn't sob loudly. It wasn't a cinematic, dramatic breakdown. It was a silent, agonizing fracture inside my ribs. My eyes burned fiercely, and my jaw locked so tight my teeth ached. Crying felt like surrendering, and I was absolutely done surrendering. I sank down onto the freezing concrete floor, clutching the wooden stool to my chest, and let the pain wash through me. I grieved for the studio. I grieved for Grandpa. But mostly, I grieved for the illusion of my family. I grieved for the parents I thought I had, the people who were supposed to protect me but had sold me out for a quick payout instead. I sat there in the dark for an hour, until there was nothing left inside me but a hard, cold, unbreakable resolve. I stood up, wiped my face on my sleeve, and placed the stool carefully back into the unit. I locked the door. I wasn't going to let them take anything else from me. Tomorrow, the real war began. The next morning, the legal chess match escalated to a terrifying, high-stakes level. Maya called me into her office before the sun was even fully up. She was already dressed for battle in a sharp black suit, a fresh cup of black coffee steaming on her desk. The developer's attorney just reached out, Maya said, handing me a freshly printed email. Mr. Sterling. He's a heavyweight corporate shark. He represents the massive firm that bought the shell of your building. I skimmed the email. It was filled with condescending, aggressive legal threats. Sterling claimed my injunction was a frivolous, desperate nuisance lawsuit designed to extort his client. He threatened to countersue me personally for millions of dollars in damages for delaying their multimillion-dollar construction timeline. He demanded an immediate settlement meeting to resolve this minor misunderstanding. He's trying to scare the life out of us, I said, handing the paper back to her. Of course he is. Maya smiled, a predatory, brilliant gleam in her dark eyes. He thinks you're just a broke, intimidated artist who got lucky with a typo in an old contract. He fully expects you to fold the second he flashes a big settlement check at you. Because, Elijah, he doesn't know about the forgery yet. We intentionally kept that out of the initial injunction filing. Why? I asked, genuinely confused. Isn't that our biggest weapon? Because, Maya said, leaning forward, resting her elbows on the glass desk. If you show the enemy your gun from a mile away, they have time to put on a bulletproof vest. They have time to craft a lie. You wait until they are standing right in front of you, laughing at you, feeling completely victorious, before you pull the trigger. We are going to agree to meet Mr. Sterling and your lovely family at the construction site tomorrow morning. At the site? I asked, feeling a knot form in my stomach. Under the scaffolding? Why there? Psychological warfare, she replied simply. Sterling wants to show you the massive machinery, the destruction, the sheer financial power of his client. He wants you to look at the ruins of your home and feel small. But we are going to use their own stage to execute them. Maya spent the next 3 hours preparing the final trap. She drafted formal, devastating criminal complaints for forgery and fraud. She contacted a forensic handwriting expert who certified that the signature on the transfer document was an absolute fake. And, Most importantly, she prepared a legal notice that officially classified the demolition of my interior walls as willful destruction of private property, multiplying the civil damages exponentially. As I sat in her office, watching her brilliantly orchestrate the destruction of my family's lies, my phone vibrated loudly against the glass table. It was a voicemail from Samuel. I put it on speaker so Maya could hear. "Elijah, it's me." Samuel's voice echoed in the quiet office, sounding ragged, breathless, and utterly desperate. "Please, man, the investors are auditing my books tomorrow morning because of this construction delay. If they look too closely, if they see the actual numbers, I'm dead. Elijah, I could go to federal prison for wire fraud. I lied to them. You have to sign the release. You owe me. I'm your brother." The voicemail clicked off. The silence in the room was heavy. Maya slowly raised an eyebrow. "Wire fraud," she said softly. "Your golden child brother just confessed to defrauding his investors on a recorded line?" "Apparently," I said, feeling absolutely nothing for him. No pity, no brotherly love, just cold, hard justice. Maya smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. "Well, tomorrow is going to be incredibly entertaining." The trap was fully set. The bait was in the water. My family and their high-priced lawyers thought they were walking into a simple negotiation where they could bully a weak artist into submission. They had absolutely no idea they were walking blindly into a legal slaughterhouse. The sky was the color of dirty iron the morning we met at the construction site. The wind was whipping off the river, rattling the green safety netting that clung to the scaffolding of my building. I stood on the cracked sidewalk with Maya, my lawyer, standing right beside me. She held a thick, black leather briefcase. She looked like an executioner in a tailored suit. A black luxury SUV pulled up to the curb. Mr. Sterling, the developer's high-powered attorney, stepped out. He wore a heavy wool overcoat and a condescending smile. Right behind him, my parents and Samuel climbed out of my dad's car. They looked incredibly smug. They actually believed they were showing up to a surrender ceremony. Dave, the site foreman, stood near the dumpster, holding a clipboard and looking extremely uncomfortable. My mother marched right up to me. She didn't look at the ruins of my home. She looked at my boots. "I hope you are ready to be reasonable, Elijah," she said sharply. "You have caused enough of a scene. The injunction is a massive embarrassment to this family. You should be grateful we are even offering you a settlement. Like I told you, you can paint anywhere." I didn't say a word. I let the silence hang in the freezing air. Grandpa taught me that silence makes guilty people nervous. Mr. Sterling stepped forward, extending a hand that I completely ignored. He cleared his throat, pulling a single sheet of paper from his coat pocket. "Let's make this quick. My client is losing tens of thousands of dollars every day this site is frozen. We are prepared to offer you a one-time nuisance fee of $50,000 to drop the injunction, vacate the premises completely, and sign a non-disclosure agreement regarding this family dispute." He looked at me like I was a stray dog he was tossing a bone to. Maya finally stepped forward. She didn't open her briefcase. She didn't hand him a counteroffer. She just looked at Sterling with pure, unadulterated pity. "Mr. Sterling," Maya said, her voice cutting through the wind like a razor blade, "we are not here to negotiate a nuisance fee. We are here to inform you that your client purchased a worthless piece of paper. Your firm failed to execute a basic title search on the interior rights of Unit 3C. Sterling scoffed loudly. "We bought the building, counselor. The deed is recorded." "You bought the exterior shell," Maya corrected him smoothly. "My client owns the interior airspace and all internal improvements, protected by an ironclad split ownership trust. You cannot demolish a single wall inside that unit. The sale your client executed with his parents does not convey the studio." My dad stepped forward, his face turning red. "That is ridiculous. We sold the entire property. We had legal authority." Maya finally unlatched her briefcase. She pulled out the authentic trust documents and handed them directly to Mr. Sterling. Sterling read the first page. Then he read it again. I watched the arrogant smirk melt right off his face. His skin turned the color of old chalk. He was a ruthless lawyer, and he instantly recognized a bulletproof legal trap when he saw one. He looked up at my parents, his eyes wide with sudden panic. "What did you do?" Sterling demanded, his voice trembling with fury. "You told my firm you had full clearance. You signed a warranty deed guaranteeing clear title to the interior." My mother laughed, but it was a brittle, nervous sound. "This is just a technicality. We can fix the paperwork. Elijah, tell them you authorized the interior demolition. Stop this nonsense right now." Maya pulled the second piece of paper from her briefcase. "The forgery. He can't authorize it. And he certainly didn't authorize the fraudulent transfer document you submitted to the title company last month while he was in Berlin." Maya held the paper up so Sterling could see it. "This signature is a documented forgery. We have the forensic analysis to prove it, along with a fabricated medical letter claiming my client was mentally incompetent. You didn't just sell property you didn't own. You committed felony wire fraud and grand theft." The word felony echoed against the brick walls. Sterling physically backed away from my parents like they were carrying a contagious disease. "You forged his signature?" he yelled at my dad. "You lied to a federally insured title company? My client is going to sue you into bankruptcy." And that is the exact moment Samuel completely broke. The golden child, the brilliant CEO, the future of our family, absolutely shattered right there on the sidewalk. He grabbed his own hair, his knees buckling slightly. He started hyperventilating, his chest heaving under his expensive coat. "No, no, no," Samuel gasped, tears welling up in his eyes. "You can't do this, Elijah. You have to fix it. If this deal falls through, the bridge loan collapses." "That's your problem, Samuel," I said, my voice dead and cold. "You don't understand," he screamed, completely losing his mind in front of the construction crew, the lawyers, and our parents. "The startup is dead. It's been dead for a year. I faked the user metrics. I lied to the venture capitalists. The money you gave me is gone. My entire salary is gone. If they audit me tomorrow and see this collateral is frozen, I am going to federal prison." My mother gasped, clutching her chest. My dad looked like he had just been shot. The brilliant tech company they had sacrificed my home for was a complete scam. Samuel had blown through his college fund, his loans, and their savings to fund a fake lifestyle, chasing every fake promotion and magazine cover he could buy. And now, the truth was out in the open, bleeding all over the pavement. "I am withdrawing my firm from this project," Sterling said sharply, turning on his heel and walking fast toward his SUV. "Expect a massive lawsuit from the developer by the end of the week." 2 weeks later, we were standing in the polished mahogany courtroom of the state Supreme Court. The media had caught wind of the story. A local artist fighting a massive developer and his own corrupt family was exactly the kind of drama the news loved. My parents had hired a desperate defense attorney who tried to play their absolute last, pathetic card. He stood before Judge Harrison and tried to validate the fake medical letter. "Your Honor," their lawyer argued, sweating profusely, "my clients acted out of deep parental concern. Elijah has a history of erratic behavior. They took temporary custody of his assets to prevent him from ruining his own financial future. The sale was for his own good." Maya didn't even object. She simply called our only witness to the stand. Marcus. Marcus wasn't just an art critic. He was the head curator of one of the largest contemporary art museums in Europe. He had flown in from Berlin specifically for this hearing. Marcus took the stand, adjusted his glasses, and completely destroyed their narrative. "Elijah is not erratic. He is one of the most disciplined, brilliant, and mentally sound artists I have worked with in 20 years. His recent residency in Berlin was flawless. He managed his own grants, his own international shipping, and his own complex exhibition contracts. The idea that he is incompetent is an absolute, offensive fabrication." The judge frowned deeply, glaring down at my parents. They sat huddled at their table, looking incredibly small. Counselor, Judge Harrison said, looking at Maya, the forgery is evident. The criminal investigation is already underway. But regarding the property dispute, I have reviewed the late grandfather's trust documents. The split ownership clause is valid. But there is something else here. The judge held up the thick, yellowed will. Maya looked at me, a rare look of surprise on her face. Even she hadn't caught this detail. The grandfather, Judge Harrison continued, his voice booming through the silent courtroom, was evidently fully aware of his family's nature. He did not just leave Elijah the interior rights. There is a hidden rider attached to the primary deed. It designates Elijah as the heritage guardian of the entire structure. My dad's head snapped up. What does that mean, Your Honor? Maya asked, stepping forward. It means, the judge said, his eyes locking onto my terrified parents, that absolutely no structural modifications, sales, or transfers of the exterior shell can be legally executed without the heritage guardian's written, notarized approval. The father's dummy corporation never actually owned the shell. The entire sale to the developer is legally void. Elijah controls the fate of the entire building. The courtroom erupted into whispers. My inheritance was not just a room. Grandpa had given me the keys to the entire castle. He knew they would try to sell it out from under me, so he gave me the power to freeze the entire block. Judge Harrison banged his gavel, the sound cracking like a gunshot. The stop work order is permanent. I am voiding the real estate transaction entirely. And I am officially referring the parents and the brother to the district attorney's office for criminal prosecution regarding wire fraud and felony forgery. That night, my phone rang at 2 in the morning. I was sitting on the edge of my motel bed, staring out at the highway traffic. The caller ID flashed Samuel's name. I let it ring 3 times before I picked up. I didn't say hello. I just listened. Elijah, Samuel sobbed into the phone. It was the ugly, wet sound of a man who had lost absolutely everything. They seized my bank accounts. The investors filed an emergency injunction against my company. The feds were at my apartment today taking my computers. Why are you calling me, Samuel? I asked, my voice completely devoid of emotion. I need money, he begged, all his pride entirely stripped away. I need you to hire me a criminal defense lawyer. Use the leverage you have with the building. Take a loan against it. Please, you have to save me. I'm your brother. I'll pay you back. I swear to God, I'll pay you back. I closed my eyes. A year ago, the old me would have rushed to his rescue. The old me would have drained my own savings to keep the golden child out of trouble. But that version of me died the day I saw my studio torn apart. You don't have a brother, Samuel, I said quietly. You have a resource that you completely drained. You forged my name. You tried to tell the world I was crazy so you could steal my home. You made your choices. Now you get to live in the reality you built. Elijah, please, he screamed, his voice cracking. Don't do this to me. If you ever contact me again, I will forward the recording of this call to the district attorney, I said. I hung up the phone. Then I blocked his number. I blocked my mother's number. I blocked my father's number. I blocked Aunt Clara. The separation from my family felt more permanent than a divorce. It was violent, it was painful, but for the very first time in my life, the silence in my room didn't feel lonely. It felt like absolute freedom. The very next morning, I had to return to the courthouse to sign the final paperwork releasing the injunction to the city records. As I walked down the massive granite steps of the courthouse, pulling my jacket tight against the cold wind, I saw her waiting by the street corner. My mother. She looked a decade older than she had just a month ago. Her expensive hair was slightly disheveled. The arrogant posture was gone, replaced by a nervous, twitchy energy. When she saw me, she stepped directly into my path. Elijah, she said, her voice trembling. Your father is having chest pains. The police came to the house yesterday to ask about the notary stamp. We could go to jail. We could lose the house. I stopped and looked at her. I didn't feel anger anymore. I just felt a profound, heavy pity. You should have thought about that before you committed a felony, I told her, stepping to the side to walk past her. She grabbed my arm. Her grip was tight, desperate. How can you do this to us? How can you just walk away and watch your own blood burn? You are doing this because you hate this family. You always resented Samuel. You always hated us. I looked down at her hand grabbing my jacket. Then I looked directly into her panicked, selfish eyes. I hadn't felt this alone since Grandpa's funeral, but I was no longer the scared kid standing by the casket. No, I said, my voice incredibly steady, carrying over the noise of the city traffic. I don't hate you. Hate requires emotional energy, and I have absolutely none left for you. I am doing this because I finally love myself more than I crave your approval. She flinched violently, as if I had physically slapped her across the face. She let go of my arm, stumbling back a half step. Her expression twisted into something ugly and defensive. You always had to be so dramatic, she spit out, trying to reclaim some of her lost authority. Maybe I was, I replied calmly, and maybe being dramatic was the very first healthy thing I ever did in this family. I turned my back on her and walked down the street. I didn't look back. I knew that if I looked back, I might see a mother crying for her son. But I knew the truth. She was only crying for herself. 6 months later, the dust finally settled, both legally and literally. The fallout was massive and brutal. My parents avoided prison time by pleading guilty to a lesser charge of criminal fraud. But they were hit with fines so massive they had to sell the suburban house and drain their retirement accounts. They moved into a tiny, rented condo on the outskirts of the city. Samuel wasn't so lucky. His investors pursued federal wire fraud charges. He was currently awaiting trial, completely broke, and legally barred from acting as a corporate officer ever again. The golden child had finally hit the ground. As for the building, the massive real estate developer was furious, but they had absolutely no leverage. To avoid my civil lawsuit for the destruction of my property, they agreed to a massive multi-million-dollar settlement out of court. I didn't take the settlement money and run. I used every single penny of it to rebuild. I hired my own contractors. We stripped away the ugly scaffolding. We reinforced the original brickwork of the exterior. Inside Unit 3C, we repaired the walls they had smashed, sanded down the original hardwood floors, and installed massive, beautiful skylights. The city, noticing the massive media attention the case had generated, realized the cultural value of the block. They worked with Maya and me to designate the old factory as a protected cultural arts center. I wasn't just a tenant anymore. I was the sole legal owner and the director of the building. We converted the bottom floors into affordable studio spaces for young, struggling artists who needed a place to work without the threat of predatory rent hikes. The opening night of my new gallery inside the restored Unit 3C was a massive event. The loft was packed with art collectors, local journalists, and fellow artists. Waiters walked around with trays of champagne. The smell of fresh paint and expensive perfume filled the air. I was standing near the back window, watching the crowd, when a familiar face pushed through the throng of people. It was Julian. Julian was a fellow painter I had known for years. We used to drink cheap beer together and complain about the art world. When I came back from Berlin and found my studio destroyed, Julian had been the first person to call me, offering fake sympathy and telling me to just take whatever money my parents offered and move on. He walked up to me now, holding a glass of champagne, flashing a bright, enthusiastic smile. Elijah, man, look at this place. It's incredible. You really pulled it off. I always knew you had it in you to beat those corporate sharks. He reached out to clink his glass against mine, but I didn't raise my hand. I just stared at him, letting the silence stretch until his smile started to crack at the edges. What's wrong, man? Julian asked, nervously adjusting his collar. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. During the intense discovery phase of our lawsuit, Maya had subpoenaed my dad's email records to prove the timeline of the fraudulent sale. We found a lot of interesting things in those emails. I unfolded the paper and handed it to Julian. It was a printed email. Sent from Julian's personal account to my father, dated 3 days before I left for Berlin. Julian stared at the paper, the blood completely draining from his face. The email read, "Mr. Davis, you really need to look at the zoning laws around Elijah's studio. Developers are paying $30 million for the adjacent lots. Elijah has no idea what he is sitting on, and he's too stubborn to sell. If you have his power of attorney, you should move on it while he is in Germany. Just looking out for the family." Julian had sold me out. He was jealous of my residency in Berlin. He was jealous of my talent. He knew my family was greedy, and he deliberately planted the seed in my dad's head, hoping to get me kicked out of the city so he wouldn't have to compete with me anymore. "Elijah, I can explain," Julian stammered, his eyes darting around the room, terrified someone was listening. I was trying to help you get a payout. You were struggling." "You are a coward, Julian," I said, my voice completely calm. I didn't feel the rage I had felt with my parents. I just felt pure disgust. "You tried to destroy my life because you can't figure out how to mix your own colors. Put the glass down." Julian froze. "What?" "Put the champagne down," I commanded softly. "Turn around. Walk out of my building. And if you ever show your face at an art event in this city again, I will staple copies of this email to every gallery door in town." Julian placed the glass on a passing tray with a shaking hand. He didn't say another word. He turned and practically ran toward the exit, disappearing into the cold night. I watched him go, completely purging the last toxic element from my life. The rest of the night was a blur of absolute triumph. The gallery show was a massive critical and financial success. The centerpiece of the exhibition was a massive oil painting I had started the day I walked into the destroyed storage unit. I called the painting Inheritance. It was a dark, violent, beautiful swirl of charcoal grays, rust reds, and brilliant streaks of gold, depicting a wooden stool breaking through a cage of iron scaffolding. Around 10 o'clock, Marcus, the curator from Berlin, walked up to me and placed a red sticker next to the canvas. It had sold. It sold for a record price to a contemporary museum on the East Coast. My work was no longer a nice little hobby. It wasn't an accident. It was undeniably universally respected. My name was permanently attached to my own success, entirely independent of my family's toxic shadow. When the final guests finally filtered out and the cleaning crew began packing up the glasses, I told them I wanted to be alone. I locked the heavy oak doors of the gallery. I stood in the exact center of the loft. The scaffolding outside was gone, allowing the city streetlights to cast long, beautiful shadows across the polished hardwood floors. The air smelled like turpentine, fresh drywall, and absolute victory. I breathed it in, letting it fill my lungs. I walked over to the corner of the room where a single panel of fresh, unpainted drywall had been installed to cover a structural beam. It was a blank, white canvas waiting for a purpose. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a thick piece of raw black charcoal. My fingers didn't shake. I didn't feel the weight of my mother's expectations or my brother's arrogance. I just felt the solid, grounded truth of who I was. I pressed the charcoal against the white wall and drew a single, thick, unapologetic line right down the center. It was a mark of ownership. It was proof that I survived. My parents wanted to turn this place into capital. They wanted to liquidate my history to fund their golden child's lies. But I fought back and I turned it back into meaning. If there is a moral to this entire nightmare, it is this. The exact moment your family looks at you and sees a resource instead of a human being, they stop being your family. That moment hurts like absolute hell. It feels like the ground is opening up to swallow you. But you have to survive that fall. Because the second you realize you don't owe them your life, that is the very first moment you finally belong to yourself. Thank you for sticking around and listening to my story. I know it was heavy, and I know it was long, but I hope this resonated with you in some way. Family dynamics can be incredibly toxic, and walking away is sometimes the only way to survive. Have you ever found yourself in a similar situation where you had to cut ties to save yourself? Let me know in the comments below. Before you go, I have a special request. If you are hearing my voice right now, it means you stayed with me through the entire journey. You are part of what I call the 1% Club. Please comment the letter W down below. W stands for winner. It's our secret sign to recognize the amazing people who watch until the very last second. Please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and follow me so we can share more stories together. Stay strong, protect your peace, and I will see you in the next video.